For the founders in the space with style and grace, I'm Brittany Antoinette, host of the Not So CEO talk show and founder of The Idea Girl. From work and wellness to bootstrapping and burnout, we cover all bases on building a brand, whether you're a seasoned vet or you're just getting started. Through guest interviews, water cooler combos, and office hours, we're paving way for a new era of Not So CEOs. So grab your notepad and tune in for unfiltered banter on branding, business, and bullshit. Rachel Cargle is an Ohio-born writer, entrepreneur, and philanthropist. Her work exists at the intersection of race and womanhood, where she explores the question of what it means to be well in the world. This theme is written about in her book, A Renaissance of Our Own, a memoir and manifesto on reimagining, published in 2019 with Penguin RandomHouse. In 2019, she founded the Loveland Foundation, a community-focused nonprofit that provides free access to mental health care for Black women and girls across the United States, providing over 72,000 hours of therapy to over 10,000 participants thus far. Her bookstore, Elizabeth's Bookshop and Writing Center, lives in her hometown of Akron, Ohio, and exists as a community hub that works to highlight, promote, amplify, celebrate, and honor the work of writers that are often excluded from traditional cultural, social, and academic canons. Rachel lives between Akron, Ohio, where she stewards her late grandmother's bungalow house on a hill, and Kingston, Jamaica, where she stewards a home next to the river, an ongoing reminder of just how sweet life can get. Rachel, thank you so much for being a guest today on the Not So CEO talk show. I am super grateful to have the chance, the opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I'm so happy to be chatting with you.
I am so happy to be chatting with you and you and your glorious fan. It's giving queen energy. I'm here for it. One thing I love, especially when the weather is hot, I
Mhm.
love me a fan. There's just something so classy about having a fan, especially if I'm like at the bus and I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
or at the train, and I just
I
whip it
refuse
out.
to suffer. I refuse to suffer.
And as you should not, as you should not. Like, thank you again for being a guest. I really love to kind of always start the episodes on how we met and how we even have a connection. So I first met Rachel back in, I want to say the year was 2019. I definitely want to say that it was 2019. And this was when Black Girl in Ohm was still formed, and they were doing a tour all over the wings. And
Yes.
rest in peace to the wing.
RIP.
RIP to all of the wings across the country.
Mhm.
And Rachel was one of the keynote speakers. And I didn't even know that Rachel was one of the keynote speakers. I just showed up. Lauren was like, just come. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna come. Because at the time I was like working on their branding and whatnot. And I remember seeing Rachel and she had like this stunning necklace. And I was just so enamored by the necklace. I'm just like, oh my God, like this is a stunning piece. Like as a fashion girl, it caught me, right in my steps. And Rachel was just like, yeah, it's wanted to treat myself and so on and so forth. And the next thing you know, Rachel goes on stage and I'm like, oh my God, she's so cool. And then the next time I got to meet you in person again was at Kelly's Met Party,
Mhm.
which was a time
Yes, we had
last
a good
year.
time.
I wish you were in New York so you could have came to this one. We were
I
acting a
know.
fool.
I'm sure. I knew it already. I was looking on all of y'all socials to see how y'all were acting.
I didn't even get to post mine because I was so tired. Even Kelly was texting me like, "Girl, the fact I got to post right now, it's just too much. It was just
Mhm.
too much." But we had so much fun. It was just foolish, honestly. It's
It was a
always a
chill
good time.
situation. I
It's always
loved
a
it.
good time. It's always a good time. But again, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited. I want to dive into our questions. And of course, like the first one I like to kind of start with is just tell me a little bit about your background, specifically kind of in your childhood. Like, what were some of your interests and what was your academic career like as a child going into like maybe teen adulthood-ish? So like college, basically.
Yeah, I grew up in the Midwest in Ohio, in a suburb of a small town. So Akron, Ohio is kind of the biggest city nearby, and I grew up in a small town called Uniontown. And one of the biggest factors of my, well, two big parts of my education growing up is one, I was the only Black girl in my class often. I was the only Black girl in a very white space growing up. My mother had the idea that many mothers in America have, that a proximity to whiteness will automatically equal a better education or will equal a better childhood. And so my mom had moved us into a government housing space in a very white neighborhood. And so I had the particular experience of being the only little Black girl in most spaces growing up. And another particular aspect of my childhood is that my mother, though she didn't have a degree, she studied early childhood education. It was her joy. She would be reading through academic books anytime she got to be with kids, working at daycares. And I should preface, my mother had polio. She had a disability. And so being a disabled woman, she didn't have a ton of options to work, but working with kids was always accessible because she could support the neighborhood kids. She could stop into a daycare and support with extracurriculars. And so I had the particular experience of having a mother who really valued the childhood experience and children in general. And so I had a wonderful childhood in that sense, that learning and curiosity and exploration were something that my mom really factored into our day to day out of her interest in early childhood development and early childhood education. I went to the public school system there for a while, which was a really good school. And then I spent some time at a Christian school, which was that very specific education experience of infusing religion. And I really loved learning. Like, I don't remember ever having a negative feeling about going to school. I loved the thought that I was going to get brand new information every time I went to class. I love the social aspect of school. I really enjoyed that. And then, heading into high school, my mom took me out of that Christian school. I went to a public school. And then heading into high school, I really started to get critical about my own education. And I remember hearing some teachers talking about a college prep school. And I was like, what is that? Like, what does that mean? Where are those things? And they were describing to me some of the local Catholic schools in the city. And I went online and I looked up these schools, and I decided that I wanted to see if I was capable of going to a college prep school. So I remember printing out the application and taking it to my mom and being like, Mom, I want to go to a private college prep school. Can I apply? I looked up scholarships, and my mom applied for me. And I actually, for my freshman year of high school, I had a work study program of assisting the janitor after school in order to help my mom pay for my tuition to go to this
Wow.
college school that I begged her to let me go to. And I graduated from that high school, and it was such a wonderful education. I loved, we were taking philosophy classes, and I loved all my English classes. And it was just, it was why I wanted to go to that school. And there I met more Black girlfriends who are my best friends to this day. And I ended up really, getting the education that I was looking for there. And to this day, I don't have a college degree. Right after high school, I followed a boy to a local university, and it was only about 2 hours away from home. It was still here in Ohio, and I was blown away by the good feeling of independence, of being away from my mom, of exploring what I could do. I just have always been very driven by the possibility of things. And so I was applying for every organization. I wanted to be on boards. I wanted to be in leadership programs. And I really proved something to myself in college when I first got there for those first 2 years. I was there for 2 years. And it really launched me into a recognition of how much I valued my curiosity and my learning and my interest in the intellectual. I wanted to think deeper than just what we were talking about in the classroom. I wanted to, the guys that I was dating were like the guys who could pull me into a really intellectual debates. And I really loved when the classroom space was like that. And so I think I built a self-confidence in my intellect during those few years, and my
Mhm.
intellect and my leadership. Yeah, and then I left there and got married, and I've kind of been on a windy autodidactic journey ever since then, as far as
Wait, you were married?
yes.
I did not know that. What?
Yes, I left I met him my freshman year, and he looked at me and said, "You are the woman that I'm marrying." We were all around the same age. We went to church together.
What?
Yeah, we had attended, you know how college students, they all go to what, like one local church, and so we had all gone to the same church, and he and I just took to each other very quickly. And yeah, I was married. We got married. We both left school. He started working full time. I stayed home and like really enjoyed taking care of the house and volunteering. And I just had a very, really lovely life with him. And I just realized that that's not where I wanted to be. I didn't see my life existing in Ohio. And I knew I was on the trajectory of probably being a mother. He was a minister, so we were very deep in the church. And
Ooh.
I was really starting to disagree with the church in very critical ways. And I knew I was disrupting his world with a lot of my dissent. And I just didn't want to do that either. And so, we amicably left that marriage. And that's when I moved to the East Coast, and I was in DC for 3 years, and then I moved to New York, and I was in Brooklyn for almost 9 years before I left last October.
Wow. Wow. It's like you were here and you lived like many lives.
I have. That's not even the half of
How
it.
has maybe marriage even just shaped your view or your look perspective on just marriage and partnership in general, being that you had already been married? How has that
Yeah.
shaped your outlook in today, like today now?
It really, I'm so grateful for that marriage. One, he's a wonderful guy. I wrote a piece for Cultured Magazine that commemorated 10 years since he and I had gotten divorced. And it was a piece that really spoke to the fact that he was a good man. He just wasn't good for me. And there
Mm.
had to come a time where I decided what held more weight, the perception of good or the reality of good. And so walking away from that marriage was a huge milestone in my life, because it was an indicator that I was willing to trust myself, and I was willing to do what was best for me outside of what everyone for me at that time meant. The church, my mother, his family, he had a huge family of like 7 children, all of these. And even, my friends who saw me married to a wonderful man who had like built me a home, and I got to stay home because he made more than enough money. And there was a lot of confusion about, like, Rachel, why would you step away from this thing that the rest of us are kind of clamoring for? And it was a milestone moment of self awareness and self trust. And now that I'm on the other side of it, I'm, eternally grateful for my younger self being willing to take that risk. But to answer your question about how that marriage shows up in my life now, it is such a huge part of my comfortability dating. I don't want to say comfortability. It's a huge part of how I'm able to move through dating, because I have recognized that a lot of my peers just want to be proven that they're wifeable. Like, prove to me that I am worthy of being wifed, as opposed to actually wanting to be married, actually wanting to go through the depth and the process of a marriage. And I have no judgment either way, but I perhaps would feel that same way. And I'm so grateful that I got to experience or have that qualifier that I shouldn't need to have, but I recognize that a lot of us do. And that allowed me to kind of date with a bit more perspective outside of, can this person prove to me that I am worthy of being wifed? And it got to be a bit more expansive, and in some instances just not taken so seriously, and in other instances the seriousness of the relationship could revolve around something else besides who we are and what we're doing here. And yeah, I'm really grateful for how that marriage, since it was good and since there wasn't anything terrible that broke us up per se, just a recognition that that's not where I wanted to be, I really got to sit with being satisfied per se in that space of, will I ever get married? Am I ever worthy of being proposed to? And while I absolutely despise that that's anything that any of us would desire, it has become more and more clear to me over time how much scratching that particular itch is kind of what a lot of people are craving.
Wow. Oh my goodness. It's the eloquence for me. Can I just ask, you are extremely self-aware, and that's evident. You're extremely self-aware. Throughout this time, when you guys decided to amicably
Mhm.
split, was there ever a point in time where you grieved what
Oh,
was, or you even thought back, like, this the decision that I want to make? And what was that process of grieving like for you?
I was the one who wanted to end the marriage. I was the one who said, "Hey, I don't really want to be here anymore. What could this look like for us to uncouple?" And so I'm sure that he was holding way much more of the grief than I was, even though he agreed, even
Mm.
though he was like, "Yeah, I think I can see you're not happy here." It's still, there still is a loss because he really was my best friend. Like, we were friends. We laughed so much together. We dreamed so much together. And so there was going to be a loss in general that we were going to collectively grieve. And I think that I can remember going through some of the emails that I had sent back and forth with him, let's say in the months or maybe year after our divorce. There was a lot of like, did we make the right decision? Do you still care about me? Like, what did I lose type of energy in my communication with him? But I think that the grief of it really wasn't necessarily I'm losing this marriage. I think it was the societal ingraining of, did I lose my only chance to ever be someone's wife? Which that was the heaviness of it for me, of like, did I lose this thing that I don't even know how much value it will have for me later? And I remember thinking, like, what if no one ever wants to marry me again? What if I miss this opportunity to be in a, because like I said, he was a good guy. Like, what if I miss this opportunity to be in a really good partnership? And like I said, that decision was such a milestone because it required me to, one, believe that my feelings were valid. It made me not gaslight myself out of what I clearly knew to be true, because I was making major moves to tend to a feeling that I had that this wasn't a good fit. And it also launched me into a series of events in my life that could have only been attempted if I proven myself that I had the courage to do so from leaving that marriage, to say that yes, this is good. And it was so good, but I actually deserve even better than this. Like, I could have sat with the settling of like, Rachel, you got a wonderful, beautiful Black man who takes care of you and is in the church, and every box he ticked, which was so many of them. And for me to be like, actually, I still believe that there's a better way that I could be living, a better way that I could be feeling, a better way that I could be showing up for myself. And even in my work, like, my work wouldn't look like this if I was in that space. And I am to this day still leaning on those milestone moments of me proving myself to myself.
Woo! This is the type of this is the type of talk that I needed in the
Mm-hmm.
little toxic relationships that I had in my
Mm-hmm.
my late teens and early 20s, because it
Mm-hmm.
self-awareness is a gift. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the times we don't realize as individuals how some of our goals and milestones, when you actualize it and you really think about it, and you have to ask yourself, am I settling?
Mm-hmm.
Is this it? What do I deserve? So to go from saying, is this might be my only time of being someone's wife, to saying, no, actually, I deserve more than this. It
Mm-hmm.
literally takes a certain level of self-awareness that not everyone has, and that is beautiful. So I want to ask, so you've had an incredible journey from Akron, Ohio, to becoming a renowned writer, entrepreneur, and philanthropic innovator. What has your journey been like on this road of entrepreneurship?
It's been a wild, wild space.
Wild, wild ride.
It's been a wild space, but it's been so rooted in this theme of self-knowing, this intention of, regardless of where I am landed right now, I know myself, I trust myself, and I know that I can dream myself out of or into most things. And my time in New York City, so after the divorce, I moved to Washington, D.C. I got a little receptionist job at a taxi company. I was babysitting to make extra money. I had never made my own money, really. I had never lived by myself. I went from my mother to living in a dorm for a year and straight into a marriage. And so I had never had any experience of what I was capable of or what it meant for me to exist in the world. And so I was in New York City, or I was in Washington, D.C. for 3 years, and I got bit by the entrepreneurship bug. And I was so enamored by making my own money because my ex-husband made enough to kind of just cover everything, and I was good. So I was just kind of gliding. But when I had to start counting my own dollars and deciding what my own taste in things were and how much money I would want to make in order to live the type of life I might want to live, I actually, even though I was struggling, I really loved the hustle. I loved having to be creative. I loved having to network. I loved having to reinvent myself. And what it was that happened was that I started to babysit, as I said, and there came a point at the end of the year where I was like, writing Christmas cards to all of the families I had babysat for, just as a way for me to maintain that relationship. Because I was doing things like the taxi company I was working at, I was on those babysitting apps, and I'd get a babysitting job and I'd find out the name of the child. And then at my taxi job, I would print out a worksheet for them, or I would print out the note that I would leave the parents that had the child's name on it. And I was really having fun personalizing who I was simply as a babysitter. And I loved, I would get all these 5-star reviews, and I saw how the 5-star reviews affected the algorithm on the dating apps, on the babysitting apps. And so I kind of hacked that system of every time I would finish babysitting, I would text the parent a link to my app, to my profile, and say, can you leave a review? And I was like being intentional in this now that I'm thinking back on it, like I was just being a little baby entrepreneur, seeing what I could do around clients, around customer service, around building out things. And I eventually was writing those Christmas cards, and I was like, wow, I have a lot of families that I've worked for this year. And I ended up bringing in some of my friends. So I would get a babysitting request and I would be like, hey, I can't do it, but I have someone who can. And I would take a cut of everyone's pay. And I was like, ooh, I can't believe that I can make money. Like I was like out at the club making out with the guy, and then like I had 3 babysitters out making me $5 an hour each. And I was so I love the game of entrepreneurship. I loved figuring it out, and that is what really pushed me into the world of wanting to build something on my own. And after those 3 years in DC, I moved to New York, and life just kind of took off from there. And I had a photo go viral from the Women's March in 2017. And I was asked to write by a few, at the time, Huffington Post was really big, and they asked me to write about my experience of going viral after the Women's March. And some editors from Harper's Bazaar saw that piece, and then they brought me on to do a column. And I was like, okay, I'll do a column. I was like, I don't have any degrees. I enjoy writing and I'm pretty good at it, but I'll do it. And that column did really, really well. I got a book deal from there. And with that book deal money, I started my bookstore, and I got into then, speaking gigs and developing my own programming and doing my own collaborations. And I've just kind of been building this world that looks like how I want to feel in it.
Wow. That is amazing. But one of the things I want to speak about is one of your ventures, the Loveland Foundation, which offers free therapy to Black women and girls. What inspired you to start this organization, and how has it evolved since its inception in 2018?
Mm-hmm. I feel like my work in the world is to just live out loud, to learn out loud, to grow and evolve out loud through my writing, through my work. And the Loveland Foundation is one really good example of that intention of my work manifesting. And at the time, I was a nanny in New York City, and um, I was attending Columbia University. I had been enrolled for about a year. I was attending Columbia, and I got access to mental health care from being a student. And I just had such a radical experience of being able to be heard and understood by this Black woman therapist who really helped me work through some things. And I remember that exact day of going into therapy and having a bit of a breakthrough about something, and then heading off onto the train to pick up the little girl I was nannying from, I think, tennis lessons. And in that moment, I was just like, every Black woman deserves to have this feeling of being seen and understood and recognized through therapy, because I had had therapy where it wasn't a Black woman therapist, and I had to spend half the session giving context for the second half of what I was trying to explain or work through. And I just realized how important it was for Black women to have access to Black women therapists. And so that day, I think it was just a few weeks before my birthday, I created a GoFundMe to raise money for Black women and girls to get their therapy bills taken care of. And what I thought was going to happen was that I was going to get this money, and then I was literally just going to call. I was going to have women submit their therapist offices, and I was going to call and be like, I'm paying off the bill of so and so and so and so. And that is what I thought it was. I had no experience in philanthropy. I had no experience of doing any type of nonprofit work. But I knew I wanted to do it, and I saw some possibility in the need. And I think in the first 24 hours, I raised like $10,000. And then over the first 6 months, my followers at the time, I think I had maybe 17,000 followers. I'll maybe even perhaps say 25,000 followers. And I raised $250,000 over 6 months. And at that point, I got so lucky. I don't know what I did in another lifetime to get this lucky, but I was sitting at a co-working space, and this woman comes up to me and she goes, Rachel, I have been following your work, and I just want to know who your PR agent is. And I was like, I am my PR agent. I don't have a PR agent. And then she was like, well, I'm a philanthropic advisor, and I'd love to advise you on the Loveland Foundation as like an offering. And I was like, yes, I'd love any help I could get. I had all this money coming towards me, and I'm like, I don't want to get in trouble for it. I don't know what to do with it. And she came on to my team full time, and she has been my CEO since the beginning. And she's still there today for the last 5 years now. And so I've had just this, and she's a Black woman who really just caught my vision. And yeah, I just got so lucky. She's built out a whole team of Black women, one Black man, who are running that entire foundation. And we've been able to there's the sweet part of the foundation for me is that, I get to have this work out in the world. The women who are getting therapy are getting the support they need. Then the therapists are getting paid their full rate. When we say free therapy, it's because we are paying out vouchers where therapists let us know how much that session costs, and we pay them their full rate. So this isn't free, we're making sure that we're taking care of the therapists as well. And we also do like group therapy for therapists. The therapists are part of who we are serving also. But for the Black women and girls, we've been able to give over 175,000 hours of mental health care. We've paid out over $4 million in voucher paybacks to therapists across the country. And it's just been it's a whole thing of its own. It's far beyond anything I thought or dreamt or imagined. And I'm just grateful to be the vessel for it, and to get to continue to serve as the president of the organization as it grows and evolves and turns into this big, beautiful thing that I am grateful to witness as well.
Wow. Radical isn't even like radical wellness. Like wow. I am speechless. True. Because you have a gift for actualizing and manifesting things into fruition, and being able to take your own experiences and being able to resonate with others, and seeing that there's a bigger problem outside of you, right? Like, you went to therapy and you realized this is impactful. I had a breakthrough. I had a shift in my perspective and the way that I feel. And by you saying, you know what, other Black women out there need access to this. That is, girl, oh my goodness.
I mean, that's all my work too. My bookstore in Ohio opened because I had moved back to Ohio to care for my mom. And I was like, I really need a bookstore like I would find in Brooklyn. And so there wasn't one. There weren't any independent bookstores that held the type of Black literature that I would have wanted to either sit down and write nearby as a writer, or that I would pull from the shelf. So I just started my own bookstore that started that. And my home in Jamaica. I love being here. And now I host retreats here. Like I'm just living out loud and bringing Black women along the way as I figure things out. And I really feel grateful that that's my work.
I listen, I'm gonna book a flight.
Yes,
I'm gonna
come.
come down there this year. And I
You
kid you
will.
not, there was a post that you posted, and it was a hand game. Oh my
Yes.
God, which was like, let's get the rhythm of the feet. Let's get the rhythm of the hot dog. I teared up watching that, and I tagged my friend. And it
Mhm.
was just like an innocence, just a very overwhelming feeling came over me. It's like
Yes.
I remember when I was that age. I remember when
Mhm.
I was playing those games. I remember what life was like before life got
Yes.
serious. I remember what
Yeah.
life was like before it got stressful, before I
Mhm.
cared what everyone thought about me.
Yeah.
I was the
Yeah.
most fearless. So for just even the energy off of that post made me say, okay, let me book a flight. Let me figure out
That's
how I'm
so
gonna get
you know
down
that
here.
that group I host a retreat called the Long Weekend, and I do it over all American holidays so that when people come they're not losing too much of their work days. It's
That is
just
so
over the
smart.
long weekend. And so I really have this intention of bringing African American women out of America and here into Kingston with me to really be able to just breathe and think outside of the oppressions we know we either are witnessing or we just know in the back of our heads that exist in America. And being here, being American, I am so American. I see that about myself from being in Jamaica so much. And I've had to do so much racial processing just from what I see about myself from living here. And be that group that you're saying from the video, I curate each group. So people apply and then I go through and I like carefully curate each group towards what similarities are, what differences are, what they're looking for in a retreat. And it's all inclusive. So like during the time here, I have a massage therapist come up to my house to give massages out on the patio. I have a chef come cook for us some nights. It's really an opportunity for Black women to just like come outside of the US and breathe. There's no outcome. There's no writing that needs to come. I don't need them to tell me what they're producing at the end of it. It's just a rest retreat. And that group was all Black women therapists. Every single one of them were therapists. And it was such a particularly beautiful trip. The trip before them was all Black women 50 plus. And that was such a cool trip as well. And so us doing those hand games, one of the guests, her name's Della Mosley, and she is doing a lot of work around how hand games and poems and these songs exist in our Black bodies and how they come up for us. And so when she was telling us about our work casually over a meal, we were like, we were remembering all of them, and then we decided to record it. And I'm so glad we did. It was so much fun.
I'm so glad that you did too, because that is a part of our history.
Mhm.
Those games, like I was a double dutcher. So I used to love playing
Mhm.
double dutch,
Mhm.
DISS, choices and beauty. Like
Yes.
it's such a Black girlhood is so precious. And you were mentioning earlier about Elizabeth's bookshop and writing center. I wanted to ask you, so you have an umbrella company, the Loveland Group,
Mhm.
which houses several social ventures, including the Great Unlearn and Elizabeth's Bookshop and Writing Center. How do these ventures interconnect and support your broader mission?
Mhm. Yeah, I really wanted to have a career that could be as expansive as I wanted it to. And when I was newly divorced, living in DC at that time, I was really looking around for examples of how women were living and what I might want to aspire to. And one of the people I looked at was Oprah, not so much for an idea that I wanted to be in journalism or anything like that, but I really was inspired that she both had her show, she had a school for girls in South Africa. She had a pizza at Target. She had, like she really was just doing what she wanted to do. It seemed like she could wake up one morning and say, I want to do this. And then she could kind of bring it to the world because of the audience she had built and the trust that they had in her way of moving through the world. And I decided I wanted that. And so I really looked into the back end of her company. Like I went on, who knows what website, but I looked at the back end and she had an umbrella company, which hers is Harpo. And then under Harpo is her production company, her whatever, whatever, whatever. And so the Loveland Group is my umbrella company. And then all of my ventures exist under it. My bookstore, The Great Unlearn, my own book contracts, my retreats, all of them kind of have their own little pillar together underneath this umbrella company. And how that works in terms of in a business sense is that I really love to figure out all of the ways that my companies, because they all have the same intention and mission that comes from my values. If it's a company created by me, it's going to hold my values. And so, for example, my bookstore, there's no white cis men on the shelves. I have no interest in hearing from them, which is a reflection of my anti-racism work that comes out in my book and writing contracts. And The Great Unlearn is where I'm pulling in experts of color and other marginalized experts so that we can begin learning outside of a white lens. And within that, my bookstore is able to provide the books that we're learning from. And when I sign a book deal, I'm making money from the book deal itself and from the fact that I'm selling it from my bookstore. So there's all of these really manifestations of new ways to do my work to keep me feeling expansive and for me to just meet the needs that I kind of see in the world. And the Loveland Foundation as a 501c3 is kind of off and branched to itself, but that is able to, we hold therapists from the foundation who have books, we offer it through the bookstore. And so there's all of these ways that I want to both be expansive and integrated in all of the work that I do.
Wow. It's interconnected. It feels like not even, I wouldn't even say a circle. It feels like a tree.
Mm-hmm.
Like it literally feels like a tree and everything is just a branch that.
Well, I often say I really see Loveland as a landscape. My company Loveland is this landscape, and the bookstore is its own little plot, its own gardening plot, but they're all rooted and interconnected under. But my staff I have my staff for the bookstore. I have the staff that's working at the nonprofit. I have my agents and everyone. I used to have these Team Rachel meetings. So I used to bring together anyone who was in partnership or in who I was purchasing or they were offering their services. So the first Team Rachel meeting happened in 2019. And it was like the lawyer who was giving me a few pro bono hours, the girl who was helping me with admin, and I was paying her like $100 a week to help me go through emails. The philanthropic advisor who would come in to give me insight on what I should do. It was just a bunch. I brought in anyone who had essentially said they believed in me and were willing to kind of support me in the work I was doing. And Brittany, I would like make a PowerPoint and be like, here's who I am, here's where I want to be, here's how I could barter, here's what I'm hoping for. And in 2020, when my life quickly changed, particularly monetarily, every single one of those people came on to work for me full time. And I already had my team before I even had the business in the company because I was engaging with people like I was on my way there. And that team of people has helped me because they had this vision from the beginning with me. They have helped me build every pillar of my work. And I continue to have now space to dream up more and see what else I might want to do.
That is beautiful. And that is the power in community. It's like you already had the vision, you knew where you wanted to go, and you also needed people who've seen it for you, who could also help you drive to that destination even faster. There's this saying, I always say this, if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you go together. And I feel like that is an example of that. What was the inspiration for your title, A Renaissance of Our Own, a memoir and manifesto on reimagining? And what was the process like of authoring your own book?
So the inspiration for the book was actually, I had written that title down years ago, maybe in like 2016, 2017. And I had just moved to New York City and I was so happy. I was living in where was I living? I was living in Flatbush, happy in a little apartment that was just like a shoebox in my one little room with 5 other roommates. It was just like it was a crossroads of I have moved into what I want to be doing and not just what I have to be doing. And I was just landed in New York, ready to hustle, ready to see what I was capable of. And I was journaling and I wrote down, I feel like I'm in a renaissance of my own. And I kept that notebook all the way until this moment. And when I got to choosing the title of this book, I wanted to do a nod to that version of myself that got me here, that had just landed in New York and was really ready and excited to see what my renaissance would be.
Wow. So you wear many hats as a contributor to various high profile publications, to doing your retreats, to being the president of the Loveland Foundation, to publishing your first memoir. How do you balance your writing career and your entrepreneurial endeavors and your philanthropic efforts? How do you manage to balance all of them together?
Well, first of all, I have a team. I have two full-time employees who are with me working through projects and collaborations and relationships and possibilities within my work world. And I think a big part of my ability to stay grounded with the interconnectedness of all of it is that it all kind of is the same work, just shaped in different ways. And so the things that I'm talking about in the boardroom of the Loveland Foundation are also the things I'm writing about when I'm commissioned by LA Times to write a piece, which is the same thing that I'm considering in working with my bookstore team about programming and inventory. It really is all interconnected, and I don't often feel pulled one way or another, but I think that I'm in a spot right now in my career where I'm really needing to build out some routine and ritual that speaks to how I'm prioritizing each of those things, how I'm pouring into each of those things. And I really love the space that I'm in, like being on the board of the foundation, and I am also having such a great time exploring the art world, and I've been able to do some art writing, and I'm on the board of the Akron Art Museum, and I've been able to kind of push myself into new areas. And I think that with this expansiveness, my old tools aren't working anymore, and I have to build new tools to keep me just grounded and keep me enjoying where I am. I don't want to be in that space of, oh, why am I doing this? I don't want to be here. I feel overwhelmed. Like as soon as it doesn't feel good anymore, it might be time to move on because I wouldn't even be of much service. And so I just stay aware of myself, be willing to let go of old tools to pick up new tools. And I'm still, yeah, I'm ever changing, ever learning, ever shifting. And right now it feels like routine and ritual have been frameworks that have served me in being able to show up in each of these spaces.
Love that. So, mental health, of course, is a critical aspect of your work with the Loveland Foundation and just everything you do as a whole. What advice would you give to entrepreneurs on prioritizing their mental health amidst the pressures of running a business?
Yeah, I guess it's the theme of this conversation, but really taking the time to have a self-awareness to know what you need so that you can relay it to the people who are in your community who can help. And oftentimes we are kind of grasping at straws when we're trying to get grounded or recalibrate ourselves. And there's a really wonderful book. I wish I had it in my hand right now. It's by it's called Getting Back to Center. And it really is a reminder that the goal isn't to never stray from our goals and our intentions, but it's to be able to bring ourselves back to center. It would be silly for us to say, I want a ritual or a routine that will never falter. Like that is unkind to ourselves. We are setting ourselves up for failure with ourselves if we are saying, I want to do something that will never change or that will never falter. And so one thing that has really helped me and my mental health is that this idea that actually my only job is to keep bringing myself back to center. One, deciding what my center is. My center is someone who can be present with friends and families and lovers. My center is someone who is able to sit down and read 50 pages at one time and not feel so distracted or feel so busy that I can't enjoy something that I like literature. My center is tending to my body in the way that I need to. And sometimes I get away from center, but that does not mean I failed. It just means I have to invite myself back, and knowing that I have the ability to always invite myself back. And that has been a huge part of my own mental health. Instead of trying to work through failure every time I've failed, it's actually a much softer, sweeter experience of being like, wow, we really have gotten away from center, be thoughtful about what has pulled me away, and then just do an invitation to get back to center instead of all of the extra steps of shame and frustration and anger and grief about this thing that we didn't have to put on ourselves. Instead, we can just say, what do I need to do? What do I recognize about myself? Do I know that when I am feeling off center, I need at least 2 days where I'm not social at all? Great. Let me put that into my calendar. Do I know that when I'm off center, it means that my sleep is the thing that can most easily recalibrate that for me? Great. Let me cancel all of my evening plans so that I can get extra sleep in. These moments of self-awareness and implementing self-awareness and sharing it with our communities to say, hey, I know when I get this way, this is what I need. Can you either remind me of that or give me grace when I do that thing? We often can give ourselves a soft space to land when we're not landing right in the center of our deepest desires for like who our best self can be in the world.
Wow. Wow. Giving yourself grace during difficult times, of course, can be challenging. How do you practice self-compassion and ensure you're taking care of your own needs while supporting others through your ventures?
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing. And it's why I don't want to have children, because I can't fathom trying to hold.
Rich Auntie Supreme.
Like I just cannot fathom trying to hold all of me and my needs and my intentions and just how I want to move through the world, plus trying to rear or direct a whole other being to do just as well and even better, as I'm sure parents have a deep desire for their children to be doing even better than they are. Like, I get that. And I think that it's one of the hardest things to do. And really, I think my answer for that will come in how you build your company out to reflect. As entrepreneurs, we sometimes forget that there's no one above us. Like, we started the company. We're the ones making the final decisions. We're the ones who, you know, can change or shapeshift if we want or need to. And so I think my answer to that is you can shape your company to fit your needs, and then you can hire based on your needs. So I like to hire people who, for the first 30 minutes of our business call, we're going to laugh and talk about something personal, and then we're going to move into business. It's going to be harder to work with someone who has to do XYZ, and like they're just task-based. That's just not how my company runs. And that's not how I want to show up in my company. At Loveland, my team has summer rest and winter rest. They get 2 paid weeks off each of those seasons. And that's because I want 2 weeks paid off of each of those seasons, because I know that I want a particular summer experience and a particular winter experience that either lets me go on these summer trips that I love and not have to think about work, or I just want to rest for that time. So reminding ourselves that our company can reflect what we want our work life to look like. And entrepreneur does not mean going out and recreating our version of corporate America. It's creating our version of a work-life balance that can truly look however we want it to look. It does not have to reflect America's corporate culture.
That was a word, because I feel that so many of us do that. We become entrepreneurs only to literally establish a system, the same system that we tried to run away from, that we said that we hated, that made us depressed and stressed. And we literally create it because it's quote unquote structure. But we become entrepreneurs because we want a better way of life. We want time on our hands. But
Yes.
how can we do that if we're following and instilling the same exact structures that broke us?
Yes, I should not be as tired working for myself as I was working for corporations. I shouldn't. Then I might as well go there and not have to deal with the back end.
Right. Right. Exactly that. Exactly. Like, you might as well become an entrepreneur instead of just being an entrepreneur
Yes.
in corporate. Whew, that was a word. Your work emphasizes the importance of community and solidarity. How can entrepreneurs build supportive networks that help them through times of grief and mental health struggles?
Well, my own journey of grief, for context to those listening, is in between November of 2022 and September of 2023. I lost my mother and my grandmother and my older sister. And it was just mind-boggling. It was excruciating. It was mind-boggling. It was, and still is, just completely unbelievable what that time threw at me and my family, and particularly my nieces and nephews. And I think that what I was able to lean into really was a willingness to be vulnerable in so many places. I felt like in the midst of that, I had to decide what mattered more to me. Did it matter that I had this perception of being okay, or that I was actually okay? And what actually being okay required was a level of vulnerability that would let me say, I need help. I need to take time away. I need to bawl and cry for a while. I need a reminder that I will be okay. And so I really leaned heavily into community, and I leaned heavily into my team who, I'm so grateful, because I don't think I could have run the business myself. Um, I also should preface that one of the hires that I made back in 2020 was that I hired a CEO. I did not want to be the CEO of my own company. I wanted to be the visionary of my company. And so from 2020 until just recently, I had someone who was my CEO, and her job was to run the company while I came in with my vision and my planning and my programming and my hopes for it. And so I had actually a pretty solid team available to me while I was grieving. And while that was a huge weight off of my shoulders, there still was so much vulnerability work I needed to do with my friends and other people in my community who were asking me how they could help and how they could show up for me. And there's this saying that is so true for me. There are those of us who are grieving and those of us who have no idea what's coming. Like, that once you go through a loss, like of a parent or a sister or a grandparent, you look at the world differently. You walk through the world with like kind of this lens that recognizes grief, like grief recognizes grief. And so that new lens made me part of this brand new community of grievers that made me say, oh, I want to show up for other people who are grieving, because I recognize how hard this is. And so it made grief just a part of my life. One of the best things to do for mental health as we move through our grief is to accept it as a part of our life and not something that we need to work through, we need to get over, we need to push aside, we need to quiet until we get time to grieve. I have integrated a grief practice into my life in the same way that I have a yoga practice or a writing practice or a friendship practice. I have a practice of grief that includes an ongoing opportunity for me to be in relationship, not only with the people who have passed by having a grief practice, but a relationship with the grief that lives inside of me, of what it means to be a walking, living person on this earth that has lost a huge part of herself. And that grief practice has actually been the answer. None of it is what we could do to get through it faster. None of it, I have no answers. I don't know how to get through it faster. I don't know how to push it out the way. I don't know how to quell it. All I know how to do is be in relationship with it. And for me, that has looked like, me and my mom used to have coffee together. Like, we would talk on the phone and drink coffee, or when I was there at her house. And so now every time I sit at my kitchen table and drink coffee, that is a moment of me being in grief practice, where I'm in consideration of my mother and maybe sharing something in my mind with her or writing her a letter. My sister, Michelle, she used to listen to Lauryn Hill so much. And so now when I'm driving, Lauryn Hill might always be the first song, so I can be in relationship with my sister and in memory with her. There are these ongoing ways that, even my grandmother, I recently moved back home to Ohio, and again, I don't know what I did in another lifetime to be so lucky, but I came and I was like, okay, I'm ready to buy a house perhaps. And I pull up Zillow, and my grandmother's old house was one of the first things I see. And we had to sell the house in 2017 when she got dementia, but the house was there and it was available and I got it. And so being in that house, I live there now. I live between there and Jamaica, and being in that house, my bed laying where my grandmother's bed laid, and for me to look up to the ceiling and have a grief practice of just mourning thoughts in the way that I know my grandma had to have laid there for 40 years, looking up at the ceiling, thinking about her day. That is a grief practice of me being in relationship with my grandmother. So that's my answer is less about what we can do to get through it, but what we can do to be in relationship with it.
Wow. Wow. And just being someone who's had to navigate such profound personal loss, like your older sister, your grandmother, and your mother, my question is, how have these experiences influenced your work and your approach to entrepreneurship?
I mean, I often say that losing a parent, but losing my mother, my grandmother, and my oldest sister, which I was born late. My mom had me when she was 40. So my sisters were like 12 when I was born, which meant they acted very much so as like parent figures as I was growing up, parent-like figures as I was growing up. And so I say all of that loss was an identity crisis. Who am I outside of the three people who always told me who I am? Who am I outside of my understanding of myself through that particular lineage, through their gaze? Who was I? Who had I always been, knowing my mother was looking at me and feeling whatever feeling she was feeling? And I really deemed it an identity crisis that grief has thrusted upon me, of me both querying about what parts of myself were given to me by them and being grateful and celebrating that, but also taking a moment, as a queer woman raised in the Christian church. My mother was not particularly thrilled that I was dating women. And what did it mean for me not to have to navigate my dating life, considering what my mom felt or didn't feel about it? My mom had a disability, and I was born into a caretaker role. And I think that there is she had breast cancer several times over her life. She was born with polio. She was either on crutches or in a wheelchair my whole life. I could not ignore the relief I felt after she passed, knowing that I did not have to be concerned every single day about if she was well, while also trying to live across the country and build a life of my own. There were all of these aspects of loss and grief that were converging into me deciding who I would be moving forward. What is home? I'm realizing home was actually just wherever mom and grandma were. There was actually no house that pulled me more than wherever they were at the moment. And me deciding, oh, well, what do I want home to be for me? What can I choose that to be? And I've really, it's influenced my work in a way that I am remembering that I defined me, that I can redefine me, that my work can look whatever way it needs to work, to whatever way it needs to look. And as a writer, as someone who recognizes my writing mostly around the conversation of anti-racism, mostly in the lens of racism within the feminist movement, I decided that I would want to write about grief now. Again, if I feel my work is to live out loud and to grow out loud, then I'm going to have to trust that my audience will follow me through whatever I'm living and learning and growing at that moment. And I was really moved by the way my audience stayed with me out of this mostly anti-racism work and into more grief work, more personal storytelling, more sharing who I was and how I'm moving through the world. And so that was a milestone point in my career for me to know that I do not have to be static. And I have actually built a community that allows me to be dynamic and show up wherever I am in my journey of life. And that has inspired me to give myself some expansiveness in growing, because I have put in the work and will continue to put in the work to build a readership and an audience that is more interested in who I am and how I'm growing than what particular thing I'm doing at any point in time.
Wow. Wow. That is, ooh, Rachel, I could listen to you talk all day, but we don't have all day. So I'm going to get down to my last questions, because everything you say, it just flows like water. And your sense of just, wow, just your way with words is just extraordinary. As someone who's navigated this loss, while achieving significant professional milestones, what words of encouragement would you offer to entrepreneurs facing similar challenges?
Just to take the time to sit with yourself. I think with loss, we feel uprooted, we feel untethered, we feel unlike ourselves, we feel perhaps even unseen. as we move through such deep spaces. And I think that sometimes the last frontier of loss is ourselves, that we kind of let go of ourselves too, because we either feel like we cannot go on with the person without the person we lost, or we feel so unseen in our grief by our community that we kind of become reclusive in order to cope. And I'm actually not even mad at any of those approaches. Like, that's kind of what grief does to people. But I hope that in those caves of darkness and those caves of grief, which we will certainly enter in and out of over the journey of our grief, I hope that we can still keep ourselves and really, ask yourself, what do I need right now? What memories do I need to go through? What sounds do I need to release from myself in order to let this go? I have, in my home here, which is kind of like up in the mountains, and there's not really a bunch of other homes near me. There's a river that runs in the back that roars pretty loudly as it goes by. And I really truly feel like my ancestors like handed this space to me, because down at that river, I can cry as loud as I need to, and I know no one will hear me. So I wail by the river often in my grief, in understanding that I have a space to release. And even though I don't want to get on the phone with anyone, I don't really want to put any work on the page, I don't want to be critical or evaluate anything, I can still at least give myself the space to release and to just grieve, like active, like grief is a verb, to do the grieving work of moving my body, of letting myself cry, of being angry in the moment I want to be angry. And so I hope that people who are going through loss, and I know what entrepreneurship looks like I'm bawling my eyes out, but payrolls due. I'm bawling my eyes out, but this contract post needs to be made. I can barely breathe, but I have this meeting I have to hop on. I know that feeling. I've lived through that in excruciating ways. And I think some of the recovery in the midst of that, was just me showing up for myself in ways that I just knew no one else could. And I think that has built a foundation of, again, self-awareness and trust in myself as I continue on this grief journey. I'm assuming for the rest of my life. I can't imagine me ever getting over it.
It's not something that you can ever get over. And it's one of the
Mhm.
things you mentioned just kind of like just triggered something for me. I lost my grandfather. And let me just clarify, everyone listening, it is not our grandpa. It's not the internet's favorite grandpa. Like, I don't need anyone girl. One time I was like, my grandpa passed when I need the DMs. No. And I'm just like, no, guys, not that
Aw.
grandpa. And my grandfather, my father's father, he was like probably my biggest fan, and he meant everything to me. Some days I forget that he's gone. And the
Mhm.
reason being is because as soon as he passed, I was still working. I had to get right back to work. I don't even think I gave myself the opportunity to grieve him. I don't even think I spent as much time crying because
Mhm.
I wasn't allowed to. I had to get right back to work. I literally got an inquiry for a huge job from Netflix that same weekend. It was like his funeral happened,
Mhm.
and then literally, hey,
Mhm.
Brittany, this is so and so from Netflix. Can you
Mhm.
do a
Mhm.
project? And in that moment, I would like to think my grandfather was the one who
Mm.
made that happen for me, because even though people do pass,
Mhm.
it doesn't mean that they're just because they're not in this physical world
Mhm.
anymore, it doesn't mean that they're not making things happen and living their full lives in the spiritual world. For entrepreneurs dealing with the grief of losing a loved one, what strategies have you found helpful in managing grief while continuing to run a business?
I be crying on Zoom meetings, so I'm not the one to ask, I don't think.
That's okay, being vulnerable.
Well, I think the answer is kind of similar to the answer I said before. Build a company that looks like how you want to move through the world. So I have a
Mm,
company where I can where I can cry on the screen. I have a company where I could be like, we're all taking the week off because I'm not coming to no meetings. So everyone put on your away. I'll follow up next week. Like, I have built a company that reflects how I want to be able to move through any major milestone or space in life. And while I would have never known what I quote unquote needed while I was grieving, my values of humanity, my values of compassion, they showed up in my company in those weeks that I was helping my mom transition, those weeks after, and even times now where, just yesterday we had a going away ceremony, or like meeting for someone who was leaving the company. And she was really instrumental in me being able to exhale as my mom was going through her transition. And I like was bawling on the screen yesterday, just showing my appreciation in that way. And I think that I really value the way that entrepreneurship gives me an opportunity to not just do a work, but to build a world that reflects how do we treat each other when we're going through something? How do we celebrate together? How do we honor and acknowledge the work that we've done together? How do we rest? How do we play? How do we blah, blah, blah? And so as I look at my company as not just a landscape for my ability to be creative, and not just as a place where I earn my living, it's world building work. It's building a world where people, I have employees who have children, like their income is a part of how they're moving through the world. And that's serious business. I do not take it lightly that there are people who live their lives within the space of dreaming new things into the world with me. And so I want to care for them in deep, deep ways. And that means building out the world of this company to reflect the type of world, not just that I want to live in, but that I think people deserve.
Wow. That was beautiful. Rachel, thank you so much for this conversation. I am so enlightened and I just feel so whole. And I'm not even gonna lie to you. I think I'm gonna schedule some time to grieve. I'm gonna I'm gonna schedule some time to cry.
Yes.
Not sad tears, but I think one of the most important things we need to remember about people who pass on is, as you said, is that death is a natural part of the process. But I
Mhm.
think Bell Hooks said this in All About Love. One of the things she talked about was that we need to honor people while they're here.
Mhm.
We need
Mhm.
to honor them. So I feel like, if anything, it does make you feel more human, and it makes you
Mhm.
see the human in other people. So
Mhm.
thank you so much for this conversation. You dropped so many gems. I'm pretty sure our listeners can attest to that, and just the importance of giving yourself grace while you're grieving. Last question is there anything that you're working on? And if so, please let me know how myself and our listeners can support you on your endeavors.
Yes, my book just came out on paperback. Let me show y'all my
Yes,
book.
please show the book. It's beautiful too. That
Thank
is this
you.
gorgeous cover.
It just came out on paperback. And one thing that I'm doing like a book club tour. So if your book club reads my book, I'll drop in for 20 minutes via Zoom to be in conversation with you. So if you have a book club, and I own a bookstore, so we could send a link where you guys can purchase your book set from us. And we also have a book club question packet for you all to be in conversation. So purchasing my book, inviting me into your book clubs. It's one of my favorite things I'm doing right now. I am just having a blast talking to people who are reading the book. If you're someone who would like to perhaps come and visit me in my home in Jamaica as part of my long weekend retreats, you can head to the link in my bio and create an application that I pull from to curate trips. So you might hear from me at some point inviting you to one of the trips if you're someone who would like to donate to continue making this possible, to get African American women out of the US for a chance to just rest and release and exhale and find joy, like doing our hand games together on a Monday morning. I'd love to be in conversation about those types of collaborations, but um, yeah, just mostly being here and in relationship. I have so many ways of my work. You can donate to the Loveland Foundation. If you need therapy, apply to the Loveland Foundation. Loveland has just a landscape of ways to be in relationship. So I'm open to receiving any and everyone in what way they see best.
Amazing. Rachel, and can you please let our listeners know where they can find you on social media or website?
Yes, my personal Instagram is just my name. Look up Rachel Cargle. You can follow the Loveland Foundation. I think it's just the Loveland Foundation on IG. And Instagram is where a lot of my work happens. We didn't talk much about Rich Auntie Supreme, but if you are a
I
woman,
know. I'm
child,
so mad I didn't talk about Rich
so
Auntie Supreme.
if you are someone who is child free by choice and looking for a space to both be contemplative and be in celebration of the opportunity to walk through the world as someone who hasn't given birth but is excited to be in relationship with other children as auntie, as village, I'd love for you to join the conversations we have over at Rich Auntie Supreme on IG too. But it's just things and things and things.
We love to see it, Rachel. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in on today's episode of the Not So CEO Talk Show. It has been a pleasure, Rachel. Thank you so much. And until next time, my friends, bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Not So CEO Talk Show. If you love what you're hearing, hit that subscribe button and leave us a review. To stay in the loop, stack our newsletter, The Paper, and follow us on social media at Not So CEO. In case you need assistance with building your brand or you're a creative wanting to go from freelancer to founder, book an office hour session with me on our website at notsoceo.co. Until next time, remember, being self-made shouldn't compromise self-care. This is Not So CEO, signing off.